Past 11.
In 2005, all of the major political parties promised a referendum on the European Constitution. Why does this matter? Why do we need a referendum, and why do we need one now? First, why this matters. The European Constitution, now called the Lisbon Treaty, includes a massive transfer of powers from the nation states of Europe to Brussels. It ends our veto, our right to say no, in about 60 areas. It sets up a permanent president of the European Union, a foreign minister, a diplomatic service. It gives the European Union the right to sign treaties and to pass new treaties, new constitutions, without asking us again, the people of Europe. That's why it's important, that's why it matters. I think it's taking Europe too far. I think we need powers to come back from Brussels to the nation states rather than the other way round. Why do we need a referendum? Well, I think when our Parliament is giving up powers, is passing powers to someone else, they should ask us first, the people, in a referendum. But lastly, why a referendum now? There is very little time left while this treaty is being discussed and debated around Europe. Many European countries, Britain included, have passed it through their Parliament and implemented it. Still, though, the Irish said no, and there's another referendum coming up in Ireland in the autumn, and the Poles haven't yet ratified it, and neither have the Czechs. So you can use June the 4th, this Thursday, the European elections, to demand a referendum from Gordon Brown. The referendum he promised, along with everyone else, back in 2005. The best way to get that referendum is to vote Conservative. Today, we are publishing the bill, the parliamentary bill that could go through Parliament right now to give us that referendum in the autumn when the Irish hold theirs. That's what should happen. This is being done in your name. Don't you think all of us should have a say in the referendum that we were promised?
The British Parliament has voted overwhelmingly against holding a referendum on leaving the European Union. A petition of over 100,000 signatures from the public had called for the debate. The government earlier ordered its MPs to vote against the motion or face penalties. Despite this, dozens of David Cameron's party members defy the order in what's been the biggest internal challenge he's faced as Prime Minister. But John Gaunt from the Vote UK Out of the EU campaign says Britain never signed up for what the EU turned out to be.
We've got a disgusting attack on democracy in the home, the mother of all parliaments, where these MPs are not voting with their conscience or with their constituents' opinions. They're voting the way their leaders tell them to, because if they don't, they'll get the sack. That isn't democracy. It's an absolute disgrace. I don't actually think we need to be part of a political superstate. No one signed up. I'm 50, so anybody under the age of 54 hasn't had a vote on this. And certainly my dad, when he voted for a common market, he didn't vote for the United States of Europe. That's what British people are upset about. There's a disconnect between the political elite in our great country and the people. The political elite in Westminster might try and stop us, but eventually we will get a referendum and we will get out of the EU. And let me tell you, it's not our problem to sort out the problems in Greece. And tell me why we should work to the age of 72 or 73 to pay for Stavros, who lives in downtown Athens, to retire at 50. We shouldn't, we're not going to, it's the end. This Eurostate is collapsing as we speak.
Let's go over to Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Joey Jones, who's in Westminster. So, Joey, this whole issue of the referendum taking over at the moment, what's the view there in Westminster?
Well, I think whatever happens, this is going to be a very damaging day for the Conservatives. I mean, in purely parliamentary sense, of course, it's needlessly damaging because with Labour obviously going to vote against this and the Lib Dems too, there is absolutely no chance of the motion passing, and indeed it will probably be pretty overwhelmingly defeated.
Let's
get back to the core issue. This is a nightmare for you, isn't it, and for the Conservatives? I mean, you could end up having the sort of rows and splits that you had over Maastricht.
I don't think this is a nightmare. I think the most important thing is what is in the interest of the country right now. And with economic turmoil on global markets and a crisis in the Eurozone from which we are not immune, it's clear that, you know, having a referendum about the structure and membership of the European Union is not what's needed now.
That's not actually all what he's talking about. Mr Nuttall has said that they would like to have one of the votes on renegotiating powers, which was a promise by the Conservatives. Are you going to keep to that promise?
We have committed to, what we did commit to in the manifesto was having a referendum. If there was any treaty change, that would cede more power to Brussels. And that is a commitment which we stand by completely.
But you also promised to repatriate powers. The manifesto promised to repatriate powers.
Yeah. Why don't you let them have their vote? Why don't you let the MPs have their vote and see what they say?
On the issue that you stood for at the election.
What we stood for at the election was to say we would have a referendum if there was a proposal to change the treaties.
Why won't you let them have their vote?
Because I don't think actually that will help the situation. Another very important point that was, I think, underplayed by David in that interview is a very significant part of our trade is with Europe, and being outside a single market will be to the disadvantage of business.
Oh, hold on a minute. 93% of our trade with Europe is covered by the WTO rules, not the EU rules. 93% of our trade would not be affected being inside or out. It was all negotiated under GATT, and GATT took it on, WTO took it on from then. So it wouldn't be affected. They couldn't put tariffs up against us whether we were in or out.
But why do you think, given the
What's your answer to that? What's your answer to that point?
We trade.
What's your answer?
40% of our trade is with other European countries. Which
wouldn't be affected, in or out.
Because yes, it would be affected.
It wouldn't, because they're not allowed to put tariffs against the WTO rules.
It's not just tariffs, but in a single market you seek to ensure a level playing field. That concerns more than tariffs, and it is an advantage to the countries that are operating on a single playing field.
The WTO rules cover non-tariff barriers as well. They cover both.
But Andrew, the trade talks in WTO have broken down. There is no agreement on trade liberalisation.
No, there is as far as Europe's concerned. It's to bring in the emerging markets they're talking about. Nothing to do with Europe.
A constitution should define the relationship between the governance of a nation and its people, setting limitations on power and providing the people with safeguards that protect them by securing the means of redress and remedy. We most certainly do have a British constitution, and it does just that. Our constitution has evolved over many centuries and consists of much written law. The best known examples are the Magna Carta in 1215 and the Declaration and Bill of Rights of 1688-9. In Britain we are governed according to the rule of law. The rules contained in our constitution define how we must be governed. Primarily, the coronation oath stipulates the rule of law as the only means of our lawful governance and places limitations on the use of executive power. Those limitations stop the divine right of kings. There ought to be no divine right of politicians either. In short, the British Constitution and the rule of law provide a framework for government by creating boundaries and constraints on the exercise of power. Dictatorial power can only come about when the ruler has both the power to make the law and to enforce it. Mussolini, Hitler and Stalin all achieved this total authority, resulting in staggering bloodshed. Our unique British Constitution prevents such unification of power taking place. Some vital principles of our Constitution are the right to jury trial, the right of habeas corpus, the presumption of innocence, the right to silence, no taxation without representation, no cruel and unusual punishments. All these principles and others are at the core of our Constitution and integral to our liberty, with a separation of powers as the safeguarding mechanism at its heart. It is entirely different from the continental system of administration and the proposed EU constitution, where nothing is allowed unless the law permits. Our ancient constitution determines that the duty of our politicians is to maintain our liberty. Liberty is the norm in Britain and is only constrained by the law. We British are free to do anything unless the law prohibits. The British Constitution has prevented the worst excesses of tyranny or despotism for centuries. Why should we wish to exchange this for a system which supports the unelected, the irremovable and the unaccountable? The imposition of the EU Constitution will mean the end of the British Constitution, and along with it will go all the protections we have enjoyed for centuries, including our right and our children's right of self-determination.